This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
A very good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. I just started thinking about chocolate factories. Do you know why I do you know why I started thinking about chocolate factories? Well, when you're a kid, right, you can't think of anything better than working in a chocolate factory, can you? Imagine working in a chocolate factory. You think to yourself, you would be able to eat all the chocolate that your heart desired. And then, of course, some killjoy adult comes along and tells you that actually, if you worked in a chocolate factory, you'd get very bored of chocolate very quickly. Now, I don't know whether that is actually true, but it kind of has a logical foundation to it, doesn't it? You find it's not hard to believe that if you really do avail yourself of the eat whatever you want rule when you start work at the chocolate factory, then probably by what, lunchtime on day 3, you've eaten so many Turkish delights or crunchies that you never want to see another chocolate bar again. And so what it is, I promise this is going to make sense. What it is that the swiftness of the journey from thinking that something sounds absolutely magnificent to realizing that it's actually a little bit rubbish or possibly even very, very bad for you. I'd love to work in a chocolate factory. It's the same principle. No, it isn't the same principle, actually. But the other thing that falls into that category from childhood is the idea if you get caught smoking, then your dad will make you smoke 20 cigarettes in a row. You'll be so sick you'll never want to smoke again. But that's not the same thing. That came to mind today because when Barry in Berlin, I'm pretty sure it was Barry in Berlin, wasn't it, yesterday? We had some amazing calls on AI, but I think Barry is the one that I'm thinking of. And Barry was very insistent that we were being distracted by all the talk, and he worked in the sector. We were being distracted by all the talk about, the threat to the very existence of humanity, the sort of apocalyptic extremes of the conversation after Elon Musk was reported to have said that one big threat of AI would be some eco-warrior taking it upon himself to program AI to kill humanity because that was the only way in which the planet could ever be saved. And it turned out fairly quickly that the reporting of those comments had been somewhat laced in hyperbole. But he did say it, albeit as a small threat or a possible threat, a small con in a sea of pros, you might say. But bizarrely, in the course of that interview between Rishi Sunak and Elon Musk did actually address a little later precisely the thing that Barry was concerned about, that Barry was warning us about, because and this has been picked up by all the newspapers. So I told you yesterday that we were going to do AI. I told you a few months ago that AI would come around with irregularity but frequency. So we would be talking about it at intervals, but I've got no way of knowing how big the interval will be. So this is the shortest interval we've ever had, which perhaps is itself quite illustrative of the growing momentum and the growing interest in the story, which itself fits with what I think is called Moore's law, which applies to microprocessors. But the speed of growth, the speed of technological advance is exponential. So you start off thinking, oh, that's funny. Someone's typed my name into ChatGPT and they've done a monologue in the style of me. And it did really sound quite a lot like me, and that was quite fun. And then suddenly, within 6 months, you're talking about an existential threat to humanity, or in this case, the end of jobs. Musk tells Sunak, AI will end work. Musk, AI will mean no one needs to have a job. Now, is that a bit like the chocolate factory? Do you think? First thought, wow, OMG, no, whoa, yay, I can play Spider-Man 2 all day and still get paid. Wow, hello, it's chocolate factory, right? Because then you sort of think, well, hang on a minute. There seems to be a very real possibility that I will never get off my sofa. or indeed take my dressing gown off from the cradle to the grave. What is it Chocolate Factory or is it Brave New World? And that's a bad thing as well, actually. Or is it, I don't know, the Promised Land? I genuinely don't know. Do you want to have a little listen to this little bit of the interview? If you can explain to me what was happening, why Rishi Sunak did it, just bizarre, frankly. I think he's just a bit starstruck. I don't think he really wanted to be Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. I think he made his pot, he made his fortune. He has a social circle which contains a heck of a lot of Tories. Spectator journalist, I think, was best man at his wedding. I think he was kicking his heels a bit. You know, I'm a tech. I think he really wanted to be a tech bro, as they're called, a startup bro, a unicorn farmer. Not in a Brexit way. It's another use of the word unicorn. And so you know didn't they have a massive place in Didn't they have a massive place in California, or they still do have a massive place? I think that's what he really wants to be, but he couldn't sort of shrug off his background. And so he thought, well, politics then. What can I do next? What can I do next? And he went into politics. But I think it was the booby prize. I think he'd rather have been a tech bro. So I think yesterday he was just fanboying Elon Musk. We'll talk a little bit later about some very odd comments he made about wishing more people would give up the safety of a paycheck to start their own business. It seems to me, as someone who earns a decent scratch, that is so removed from the daily experiences of almost everybody that it makes you wonder quite what planet he inhabits. But we'll get onto that a little later. I think he's just a big fanboy. And that's probably why the interview sounded so strange. Sam Coates at Sky did an astonishing upsum of it, which I think he described as one of the weirdest things he's ever had to cover as a political journalist. So this is the week in which we learn the government in which Rishi Sunak was the second most senior member was approaching the COVID-19 crisis with a curious mixture of carelessness and catastrophe, utter incompetence, dishonesty, almost murderous lack of engagement. Rishi Sunak's there as Chancellor of the Exchequer. Senior advisors or senior health officials describing his Eat Out to Help Out scheme as Eat Out to help the virus. He's saying nothing at all about it. He's sort of pretending it isn't happening. And inevitably, all of the right-wing newspapers today are doing exactly what he wanted and talking about his interview with Elon Musk, rather than perhaps talking about some of the questions he might have to answer when he pops up in December. And part of the reason for that is it is a bit bizarrely diverting. So anyway, have a little listen. So I don't think we'll do a journalistic critique today because we haven't got long enough, but we will have a little look at what this might mean.
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. Where we have for the first time, we will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human. And that, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that moment is, but there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job for sort of personal satisfaction, but the AI will be able to do everything. So I don't know if that makes people comfortable or uncomfortable. That's why I say if you wish for a magic genie, that gives you any wishes you want, and there's no limit. You don't have this three wish limit nonsense. You just have as many wishes as you want. It's both good and bad. One of the challenges in the future will be how do we find meaning in life if you have a magic genie that can do everything you want.
Wasn't that funny, mate? Was it? I might play that again because I hadn't really clocked the hysterical nature of Rishi Sunak's laughter. It's like my mate Luke was in an advert for a job site. Was it monster.co? What was the job site? And my mate Luke's in it, and he tells his boss tells a joke in the advert, and he does this absolutely maniacal laughter. I always think of that when I hear laughter like that. It sounded a little bit forced. Maybe I missed something. But there it is. There's the chocolate factory, the genie in the lamp. Elon Musk and I, not for the first time, thinking along very similar lines in the context of technological change. The most disruptive force ever. If I was in a slightly more frivolous mood, I think we'd do a roundup of what have been the most disruptive forces in human history and what have been the absolute game changers. The internal combustion engine, would be up there, wouldn't it? The domestication of animals, perhaps? I don't know. But we won't do that today, because I'm absolutely fascinated by that question, which Elon Musk there rather perfectly distilled. I don't know whether it is good or whether it is bad. I don't know why that's funny, but Rishi Sunak laughed his little head off. I don't know whether it's good or whether it's bad, which kind of cuts to the very, very heart of all the conversations that we've had about matters AI. I mean, it cuts to the heart of human existence, modern human existence. Or not even modern, because I suppose in a way hunter-gathering was a job, and AI would do that now. Childcare was a job, is a job, and AI could do that now. When I say now, I mean in the near future that Elon Musk describes. So I'm going to play it one more time, because I just want to nail the exact phrase that he used, a world where nobody would need to work, or words to that effect. But just for giggle value, have a focus as well on the slightly weird sounding. It's as if he sort of, you know when someone fancies you. Sorry, Keith. You know when someone fancies you, and or when you fancy someone. That's a better way of doing it. It's a bit less conceited. You know when you fancy someone and they tell a joke, and you kind of halfway through laughing at it, you find yourself thinking it's not that funny. Yeah. Anyway, here's Rishi Sunak interviewing Elon Musk.
Well, I think we are seeing the most disruptive force in history here. Where we have for the first time, we will have for the first time something that is smarter than the smartest human. And that, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what that moment is, but there will come a point where no job is needed. You can have a job if you want to have a job for sort of personal satisfaction, but the AI will be able to do everything. So I don't know if that makes people comfortable or uncomfortable. That's why I say if you wish for a magic genie, that gives you any wishes you want, and there's no limit. You don't have this three wish limit nonsense. You just have as many wishes as you want. It's both good and bad. One of the challenges in the future will be, how do we find meaning in life? If you have a magic genie that can do everything you want.
I mean, you don't need a job to find meaning in life, do you? I mean, we find meaning in life in so many different ways, but I do understand what he's talking about. We're going to reach a point where no job is needed. Now listen, it's Friday. We've had a pretty tough time of it together in recent weeks. We've been covering some really horrible events. And so I'm going to dial it down a lot today. And I'm not going to ask you a complicated question or make you do any homework. I'm just going to talk to you for 30 seconds, exactly as I would talk to you if we were in the pub together or sitting next to each other at dinner. I'm just going to ask you, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? It's so completely at odds with everything that's gone before. I know there are different levels of status anxiety, but you start worrying about what job you're going to do or not going to do at a very, very early age, or you perhaps start thinking would be a better way of putting it. You start thinking. One of the first questions adults start asking children once they reach a certain age is, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be when you grow up? And a man who does know what he's talking about suggests that none of the things that we want to be when we grow up will be necessary in the future. He's not kidding, is he, when he says, I don't know whether that's good or bad. So there is part of me that's thinking chocolate factory. Or, God, that would be great. Imagine if you could maintain the lifestyle you've got now without having to schlep your carcass into work. And then another little voice in my head immediately goes, you'd go to work anyway. You'd probably even still write books, even though you pretend that you hate it. You'd go to work anyway. You love this. I love this. I love it. Sound like Kevin Keegan now. But it's not. I mean, this job isn't needed anyway, is it? So that's another thought. Third thought that comes rushing in is, actually, how many jobs are needed? So there's a socialist philosopher whose name I forget, David, it'll come to me in a minute, Graeber. He talks about BS jobs. He doesn't use the actual word BS. And I think that is a premise built upon the idea that most jobs, particularly in media and creative industries, are utterly unnecessary. Utterly, utterly unnecessary. So, or no jobs will be needed. Well, how many jobs are actually needed now? Is your job needed? Is my job needed? Is any job really needed now, apart from, I don't know, medical care? House building? Anyway, there it is. A little bit more than 30 minutes, 30 seconds. But a question I just want to know. There's no right or wrong answer to this at all, is there? But how do you, what happens to you? What do you think? Where does your brain go when someone who is worth listening to on this subject suggests that we could be living in an era during which we reach a place, we reach a point where no job is needed?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
And of course, Elon Musk and Rishi Sunak individually inhabit a world where jobs are not needed, don't they? And probably more of us do than realise, but certainly most of us don't feel that we could take our foot off the pedal now, do we? But they could. They could never do another hour's work. They could never do a minute's work again in their lives and suffer no change or diminishment of their lives or their standard of living or their spending power whatsoever. So both Rishi Sunak and Elon Musk could dedicate themselves right now to a life of indolence and lethargy and not change in any way the amount of stuff they can afford or the amount of houses they can live in or the cars they can drive, all of that stuff. And that must be a tiny proportion of the population. I wonder where the cut-off point is. So that perhaps is why it's such an odd conversation as well. Because for some people, it won't feel like a chocolate factory. They're already in it. And they all work. That's my first profound insight of 2023. Pretty much everybody who can afford not to work still works. That's got to be pertinent to this conversation, hasn't it? 23 minutes after 10 is the time. Jason is in Fareham, which of course is Suella Braverman country. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I used to be really kind of positive on the whole AI thing. I used to think it was a good thing, but the way that the people in charge kind of have handled, well, everything for the last 10 years kind of makes
13.
me... You're 13, yeah. It kind of makes me a little more apprehensive, and I'll tell you for why. Elon Musk saying, jobs won't be needed. That, on the face of it, that does sound, great. Not a lot of people like going to work. But then you think, well, why does a government educate its citizens? Really, it's to have an educated workforce. If you don't need a workforce, do you actually need to educate your population? And likewise, healthcare. Do you need a healthy population if you don't need workers?
Well, the short answer is no.
Yeah. So I mean, this is very much, the slippery slope. This is like the worst case scenario. But you think then the only reason to keep people healthy and educated and all the things that we kind of, want in this society is a moral reason, because it's a good thing to do. And
but it's not, is it? So you're positing the death of altruism. Well, because all of the jobs that you do because you have a desire to serve would be the first to go.
Exactly. Yeah, it becomes a, if we don't need these people healthy and educated, what's the point? The people who can afford to pay for that sort of thing, sure, they'll be fine. They can pay to have their kids educated and whatnot. But the people who haven't built up millions,
so how would it break down?
20.
You see why writers, the best writers sort of since, I guess, the 19th century probably, have been absolutely fascinated by dystopia, don't you? Absolutely fascinated by H.G. Wells, George Orwell, Aldous Huxley, Margaret Atwood, just absolutely fascinated by what happens when the fundamental foundation stones of our society are changed beyond recognition. That's why Musk called it the most disruptive event in human history, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at, do you end up, and I'm not a huge fan of the films or the books, but do you end up in a Hunger Games sort of situation where you've got the lauded elite who...
I am a huge fan of the books, actually. I think they're wonderful.
Sorry.
No, I don't have to apologise, but I mean, because I'm thinking Hunger Games as well. You might have the ability to provide everybody with a decent standard of life without anybody having to do any work, but human history suggests that it would pretty soon segue into a place where the nastiest people held dominion over the weakest, and used them as sort of serfs or human crops almost. Crikey! It's Chocolate Factory, right? For you, a bit first glance, or I'll have a bit of that.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoy my job. I'm a photographer, but it's obviously AI is massively eating into.
You're near the front. You're near the front of the queue, I think. Some forms of photography.
Exactly. Yeah, and it is worrying. But on the flip side, I use some AI tools to edit photos, just for ease and speed, really. But it's not to the point of photo manipulation that you see, or complete photo generation from scratch that you then put someone else out of a job. That's the scary side of it here.
I think you're right, and be careful what you wish for. I'm also drawn to that little chink of light that I encountered just before Jason came on, which is almost all of the people in the world who don't need to work still work. Why? 0345 6060 973. Derek is in Leeds. Derek, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I want to introduce another angle, really.
Yes.
The presumption is if AI comes in, then we'll all be forced to lose our jobs and all the rest, and my God, what will we do?
Yes.
Well, just look at retired people.
Yes.
It's already here, but it's not AI-driven. It's the fact that people used to working for paid work and for some measure of compulsion no longer have that. They have an income. Very, very interestingly, it could be compared to the recent movements for a sort of universal income that everybody should get instead of worrying about benefits. Now, my point is, it can't be much different to the sea change in your life that happens when you retire. I've retired a few years back, and you then have to start to scan around for things to do. Well, my agenda filled up very quickly. And it was things that I wanted to do for once. And it was things that gave me intellectual satisfaction. And I don't mean to embarrass you, but listening to you was one of the things I do every day.
That's not going to embarrass me. It's going to make my swollen head grow ever larger, isn't it, Derek? That's the thing.
Don't it? But we all have big heads, and that means we get bigger brains. I don't mind that. And
are you sure, though?
Through the pandemic and more importantly through Brexit.
Thank you, mate.
But anyway, my point is,
yes,
we tend to overreact, I think, as people to big changes like this. It's understandable. But really, human beings are very innovative. They're very adept at adapting.
And also at feeding their brain is what you're talking about. You don't need a job, but your brain still needs feeding. I mean, there must be a difference between getting to the end of a race and not having to run anymore, which is how we could typify retirement, and never, ever, ever having to run at all, ever. They are two quite different things, but they've got common ground, haven't they? It's about the deployment of time.
Yeah, and it is, and it also depends upon your definition of work. Now, I'm differentiating between paid work and voluntary work. But take an American football. I love American football. I like Pat Mahomes, best quarterback in a generation, if ever. And that guy will admit in all his interviews virtually, what I love doing is playing American football.
Yes.
He isn't working. By many definitions, he's doing what he loves to do, and that's what we all need to find.
Yes, of course, and that would I hadn't thought of it like that. So in fact, all of us who are lucky enough to have a job that we do, even if we won the lottery, that could be something that is extended to everybody then, because everybody who's doing a job that they hate could probably think of something that they wish they could do, which is currently a paid job.
That's exactly right. And what that then leads one to think, I think, is if you're in the luxurious position where your population can be more likely to find that kind of satisfaction. We're happier, we live longer, all those things come together. Rather than having to trip out to a job at 5 in the morning that you hate.
Yeah, you're right. Have you ever had a job you hated?
There's some good sides to this.
Have you ever had
bad sides? The key to it, to me, James, is we've got to find a way of keeping people economically supported all the way through it. And to me, I'm bringing it back to now. To me, that's instituting, when the AI starts to take over, that's instituting some form of national wage that everybody gets anywhere.
It would be a universal basic income. So you're glass half full and Jason was glass half empty, and I haven't decided which glass is mine yet. Thank you. I prefer yours. I hope you're right. Thank you, Derek. It's 10:32. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
So what would happen? I mean, humans regulate, don't we? We self-regulate, usually. We adapt to the circumstances that we're in, both on a sort of meta level through evolution, but also through a societal level or a kind of circumstantial level. You cut your cloth according to what you need and what you have. But the idea of no jobs being needed, is it diminishing a bit in scale as a suggestion? So you start realising, well, there's already quite a lot of jobs that aren't needed, and there's already quite a lot of people who don't need to work. So maybe it's not quite as apocalyptic as it initially sounds. That said, David in Cardiff picks up on a very, very, very interesting point. He writes, James, you point out how since the 19th century, the greatest writers, Huxley, Wells, Orwell, etc., have been obsessed with dystopia. Since her final resignation as an MP, Nadine Dorries now has plenty of time on her hands. Who knows what great works will be added to the canon? Well, I can give you some insight into what great works are likely to be added to the canon. Seeing as I spent so much time plugging my own latest book, it seems only fair to give a nod to Nadine's. The Daily Mail has a front page today, which I swear to you, on all that I hold holy, I just presumed was a spoof. So you know when people mock up fake front pages, but the headline is much, much longer than a normal headline would be, so the font is much smaller, and that automatically makes it look like a spoof. So they cram so much, because it's very hard to tell a very good joke in 4 words. So you're going to do a very good joke as a fake front page, you need sort of 10 or 11 words. But if you're sticking 10 or 11 words into the format of a tabloid front page, then the font is necessarily much smaller than normal, and that makes it look wrong somehow. It makes it look unfamiliar. So the Daily Mail has a front page today, which I swear to you, and when I read it to you, you will, I think, find it very, very easy to believe. I just presumed it was some sort of joke that I didn't get, which happens to me increasingly as the years pass. So the Daily Mail front page today, shadowy Tory number 10 fixer who had pet rabbit butchered in mafia-style warning to his ex-girlfriend. That is the front page story in the Daily Mail today. And it is a tale, an allegation, a box of frogs, call it what you will, culled directly from the most anticipated political book of the year. That is how the Daily Mail describe Nadine Dorries' imminent effort. I mean, there are no words. Not for the first time. It's the satirists I feel sorry for. How do you take the mickey out of the decline of the Daily Mail and the weapons-grade insanity of some of the key players in our national pageant when, in real life, they have shadowy Tory number 10 fixer who had pet rabbit butchered in mafia-style warning to his ex-girlfriend? How do you make jokes about the Daily Mail being bonkers if that's a real front page? I know not, but I thought it was relevant to David in Cardiff's very salient point. Back to jobs. Simon's in Leicester. Simon, what would you like to say?
No, it's just that just to say hi, first of all, and thanks for letting me on, James. Great.
Thanks for letting you on. It makes it sound like you're going to start shouting at the moon or something. You're very welcome. I'm very glad you're here. What made you pick up the phone?
No, it's just I noticed about Elon Musk saying that obviously all jobs are going to get replaced at some point, and how quickly he thinks that this is going to happen. It's really not going to happen, hopefully, as quickly as he thinks it is. My particular job is one that is a very traditional one in a railway signal box, still pulling levers and dinging bells from the Victorian era.
Yes.
Yeah. So until we started to get rid of jobs like that, I really don't think that it's going to happen at the pace that he seems to think that it is.
Well, he hasn't really given much indication of pace. So I take your point, but I mean, we're interested in the concept of capability as much as delivery. So your job it's quite easy to imagine being replaced by technology. It just hasn't happened yet, and there'd be quite a lot of cost involved in replacing the technology. But a computer could do it, couldn't they?
They do it, yeah. They do it. And one of the points about that, when you talk about what life will be like in that kind of environment, is it's a job that's no longer interacting with the people and no longer out there in the real world. You're sat there watching a computer screen and it happening in front of your eyes, as opposed to being out there.
There should be some sort of somebody somewhere would have to be keeping an eye on the computers.
Oh yeah. You keep an eye on it, but you're in a room.
You're not doing anything.
No, you're not actually doing anything as such as physically in the same manner. You're not out there with the people. You're not out there seeing the people go by in the trains in the real world, giving the wave to the driver. You're sat watching the computer screen and it happening pretty much doing itself, basically.
Yeah. Well, what about you personally? If you woke up tomorrow and you just didn't have to work, what would you do? Take a week off. You can have a fortnight, and then what?
You spend a lot more time with the children. I'd get some more voluntary things, I suppose, obviously.
Yeah, but then no one's going to need your help.
And how? Well,
because that was my first thought as well. I could do something good for society, but they'll have bots doing that as well.
I know. It's a frightening world, really.
Yeah, we'd have to take up oil painting or join a male voice choir, wouldn't we?
We would all get very healthy and start walking a lot more hills.
Yeah, but what's the point? Just to live longer so you can do nothing for even more years. I mean, 10:42 is the time. This is a topic. This could be a vortex. This could be a permanent loop. We could talk forever about this. Some topics I sense, not just from the switchboard lighting up like a Christmas tree, but there's no answer to this question. There are as many answers to this question as there are people in the world. What do you reckon about the idea of no jobs ever being necessary anymore? Sol's in Cambridge. Sol, what do you think?
Morning, James.
Hello, Sol.
I wasn't really that concerned about this maybe a week ago.
Gosh, that's a fast-moving story, Sol.
It really is. So on Wednesday, I went to the union to...
Oh, we lost the line. We're getting back up. I think the student union, presumably, although we can double-check. Tom's in Camden. Tom, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Tom.
Nice to talk to you about impending apocalypse. Thank you.
Always fun.
I think the problem isn't even so much an individual level of what will we do, how will we fill our time with, learning French or painting ducks or things. It's on buses. A bigger level, on a societal level. We're not ready for it. We're so ingrained in the type of capitalist society we live in now, and I'm aware of how trite that can sound. But the change into no jobs is so huge that I don't think we're ready for it on a bigger national or global scale. No. And the terrifying idea is if it's people like Rishi Sunak and Elon Musk who are trying to pave the way into the brave new world, they don't really understand what it's like to be normal people in this one, let alone in the next one.
That's actually, it's a very funny observation, but it's one of those smiles that sort of turns a bit manic as you think about it, because you're absolutely right. In fact, the plan for the next hour, although we may carry on with this for a little longer, the plan for the next hour is to look at what Rishi Sunak said about people. He wishes more people were prepared to just give up their regular paycheck and try and start their own business, which I think speaks directly to...
that's fine. That's fine if your wife can give you a paycheck every couple of months from her hundreds of millions.
Well, exactly.
But the rest of us, not so much.
So the idea of people who don't actually understand the necessity of work, legislating for a world in which it ceases to be necessary, is a little bit chilling. And do you know, people think we planned this in advance, Tom. You mentioned his wife. Do you know what Rishi Sunak's father-in-law said 2 days ago?
I can't wait for you to tell.
Thank you. He said, that my request is that our youngsters, he's talking about productivity in India, my request is that our youngsters must say, this is my country, I'd like to work 70 hours a week. So Rishi Sunak is on stage with Elon Musk discussing the imminent possibility of a world where no jobs are necessary, while his billionaire father-in-law, one of the richest men in the world, is dreaming of the day when young Indian people have to work 70 hours a week.
He's saying, please sell me your children.
It's just extraordinary how much is up for grabs. But yes, I hadn't thought of the dangers of, who do you want in charge as we head into a world where no job is needed? Thank you, Tom. It's 10:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:48 is the time. Back to Sol, who has, in the space of a week, rather reviewed his previously relaxed attitude about the march of artificial intelligence. Sol, take it from the top.
Sure. So
you went to the Union last week. There it is.
Yes, the Cambridge Union,
yes.
Where the head of OpenAI came and spoke because he was in the country for the AI summit, I imagine.
Yeah.
And I went in not very concerned. I know that LLMs like ChatGPT compose a risk in the sense they're very powerful. You can give them an instruction and they'll carry it out. But ultimately, that's all they do. Yeah. They don't kind of perform tasks autonomously. They require you to tell it to do something for it to carry out that action. And there was something that Sam Altman said that really worried me towards the end. Someone asked, how do you think we'll achieve AGI, artificial general intelligence, ultimately true AI, kind of something more powerful, a super intelligence? And he said, I assumed he was going to say, we'll just keep developing what we have now. And he said, we need another boom. We need another generational boom. I don't know what it will look like, but we need something new and different. And that really worried me.
Why?
Because it sounded like OpenAI, without, not the company, but the kind of AI big decision makers who ultimately at the moment, it's not the government, it's people like Elon Musk and Sam Altman.
And that's a worry in and of itself.
Yeah, I completely agree. Are kind of just going to pursue creative avenues to find a new form of technology. I don't really know how to describe it because it doesn't exist yet.
Right.
And then they'll own that technology and it'll be theirs. And there's a book called by Aaron Bastani, called Fully Automated Luxury Communism.
Right.
And it's kind of, he speaks about how we're going to end up with a surplus of resource because we're going to have these AI workers, whatever you want to call them, who will supply us with as much food as we could want, as much water as we could want, all of kind of the basic essentials. But then the question that you have to ask is who will control that resource, who will own that resource? And it can really go either way.
So what was it that he said that changed it for you? The idea that you just thought we were on a plottable course towards ever more efficiency, whereas in fact what he's posited in his speech is a new world order.
Pretty much, yeah.
Right, okay.
There wasn't really much kind of political understanding around it. He spoke a lot about, he said the word democratization a lot.
What does he mean by that, do you think?
Yeah, so he said democratization of knowledge, as in you can ask ChatGPT a question and it'll give you an answer.
So there's no point knowing anything?
Not only that was one issue, but the other issue was then who controls the answer that ChatGPT gives you?
Of course, who controls knowledge? He does. So, I mean, not to be glib, but sure. you got a glimpse of Bond villainy, I think, that night.
I really think, I really did. And he was very nice. He came.
Oh no, of course, I'm not suggesting he is a Bond villain, but the door he opened is one through which a Bond villain could easily step.
Absolutely, and just because of who will be in control, that's what really worried me. We could have a society where, as I said, surplus resources, and then people can do jobs that they enjoy. And going back, I can't remember what's the analogy you used a minute ago about running. At the moment, he spoke about how the number one superpower that you can have, and this was in the context of the team at OpenAI, is incentivizing people. And ultimately, at the moment, the incentivization in society really is kind of, if you don't work, you won't get any money, the benefit system. And we won't have that anymore. Or we shouldn't have that anymore. And it should be, if you don't work, you won't be fulfilled and you won't be satisfied. But it might end up being, if you don't work, then we'll crack down on you.
Yes, So you come into, there was a sci-fi thing on the radio last night, actually, that really, I only caught it quite late, halfway through the series, and it posited a dystopia in which everybody has been chipped in order to sort of take away questioning almost. Everyone just happily gets on with life as it was, even though they don't need any more to be doing any of the things that are being done. So, that's dystopia in a nutshell. That's the future. The imagined future where malevolent forces control everything, and that I don't know whether Sol feels the same, but I felt that story about Starlink and the scuppered Ukrainian attack upon the Russian fleet. I thought that was a really big moment in our history, actually. And I'm sometimes a bit wary of saying things like that out loud because they sound very, don't they? They say, a very big moment in human history. But I really did think that because Ukraine is widely regarded as being a just cause. It certainly is by me. Vladimir Putin is an oppressor. He's a classic autocrat who has invaded a sovereign territory, and Ukraine wanted to respond by hitting his fleet in Crimea. And I think that the accepted version of events is that the satellite system, which would have allowed their waterborne drones to inflict enormous damage upon the Russian fleet, were rendered redundant because the satellite technology was not on. It was either turned off or not on, a decision that ultimately the decision, and there may still be some debate over whether it was deliberately turned off or was simply not on, but either way, the decision ultimately on whether or not that technology is turned on, is on at that moment, rests with Elon Musk, not with anybody who's been anywhere near an election or anybody who's been anywhere near accountability or justification or even scrutiny. That's incredible. And, I guess there's some debate about how significant it would have been. But the clever money says it could have been a hugely impactful moment in the war, in the Ukraine war. And it was prevented from happening by the fact that the technology necessary for it to happen is owned and controlled by one man. So almost into the benign dictator territory. I mean, that doesn't matter if that one man is a stand-up guy, if he's a good guy. But what if he's not? Or what if you don't think he is? Thank you, Sol. Very thought-provoking. Tony's in Chingford. Tony, what would you like to say?
That was a bit depressing, wasn't it?
Well, yes and no, because, it could be you and me that are ending up in charge, Tony, in which case it's trebles all round.
Yeah, it could be, yeah. But one of the questions I was going to ask originally was, who ends up getting rich out of all this and all the questions that come along with that. But,
yes.
But I want to be a bit more positive. I was born with a syndrome that affects my eyesight and my hearing and other things.
Okay.
I left school. I wanted to be an electrician, but I couldn't do that because my eyes got too bad for it. I did the blind sort of version of basket weaving. I did piano tuning.
Yes.
And then my ears got worse. I couldn't do that. And then I went on to so on and so forth. So I am now in a position where I can't work and I am being looked after at above basic level, I must admit, because the good old taxpayers of the UK make sure I'm all right.
Thank goodness.
But now my goals have changed. I was talking to your producer. I've had to find other things that get me up in the morning. I've got to... and it works.
Because you need engagement. You need to feel engaged.
Yeah. Yeah, I was very good at music. I've got 3 grade 8s.
Gosh.
I went on to, actually, in the last few years, because it's all popular music I played in blues rock bands, but in the last couple of years, I've been trying to write a symphony on my computer, believe it or not.
Gosh.
And I know it's not going to be any good for anybody. It might be nice, it might be a decent piece of music, but that's a personal thing that I'm thinking about to keep me going.
And to give you a sense of purpose and then a sense of achievement.
Exactly, yeah, which is what most people... My dad was a typical example. He was a worker.
Yeah.
He lived to work. He would come home, sit and watch the telly, go to bed at 9:30, get up at 6, go to work, and that was him.
Rinse and repeat.
God knows what he would have done if he never had a job. But me, I'm different. I've had to come up with this slowly over my life, because I knew this was going to happen from when I was 12. So I just kept going and thinking... There was a depressing time. There was a few years where I was really fed up. But now I'm fine. I've got kids, grandkids. I'm doing my little music things. I've got my guide dog here that I take out for walk. I mean, you have to find something to make you get up in the morning is really what I mean.
I think that is absolutely brilliant. That's the best imaginable contribution to this conversation. I don't think anyone else could have made it. You have to find something. That's it. And I mean, possibly we could rephrase it slightly because it sounds like, anything would do. But you have to find something that you love doing is the point, isn't it? And at the moment, this is where your dad comes in. I don't know whether he loved his work or not, but it sounds but possibly unlikely. He'd never stopped to think about whether he actually enjoyed it. He just had to do it. He had to crack on with it. So it gives everybody a space that historically has been reserved for the very lucky or the very wealthy, where you actually stop and think, what would I really like to do with my time?
Exactly, yes, that's it. And I am actually a pretty happy person now.
I can tell.
The fact that I'm, a lot of people wouldn't want to be in my position, but I'm pleased with what I've got, what I'm doing,
I find that, I hope you don't think I'm patronising you, I find that very inspirational, Tony. Genuinely inspirational. I really do. And I know a lot of people listening as well will. When are we going to be able to hear the symphony?
Well, it's taken me 3 years so far, and that's just learning the music side of it. Another 6 months or so, and I'll send you a link.
I'd love that. I'd love that. Thank you, mate. Have a great weekend.
All right, mate.
Cheers, mate. It's coming up to 12 noon. No, it's not. It's coming up to 11 o'clock. Relax. 11 o'clock. You're not late. It's okay. Oh, it's coming up to 11 o'clock. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We'll move it on. Because every time we talk about AI, I get so engrossed in it. I think, we'll carry on with that. And I think we're going to be talking about it for the rest of our lives. For some presenters, it's parking tickets. For me, it's the future of humanity. It's just horses for courses, swings and roundabouts. So there's no need to crack on with this particular element of the conversation. I'd like to turn your attention instead to something that Rishi Sunak said that I am prepared to pillory, but it's possible that I would be pillorying it for the wrong reasons. We can find out, can't we, after this?
James O'Brien on LBC.
3 minutes after 11 is the time. Why have you never started a business? Why have you never started your own business? I thought about it, actually, not long ago. I had an idea. Shall I tell you an idea, or will someone go off and do it? And then I'll look back and you'll be worth millions, and I'll think, you silly sausage, why did you share all your best work with it? So I think, that there is a gap in the market for radio adverts. Quite often radio adverts are made by advertising agencies who see the radio advert as a bit of an afterthought for the main advertising campaign on the telly or in print or on billboards. And I thought, when my career was sort of going in circles about 10 years ago, I thought that I'd be quite good at that. If I could find the right people, we could make very specific, bespoke adverts for radio, which, just off the top of my head, would never involve the sound of people eating. And then I just sort of got bored and lazy, and it never happened. So would you believe that I had an entrepreneurial flair as a teenager? I organised balls. As opposed to speaking them, which is the career I followed when I grew up. But I used to charge people my own age roughly 10 times what they'd have paid to go to a disco wearing a dinner jacket and a ball gown. And it worked really well. Between the age of 16 and 17, I was absolutely minted. And then again, I lose interest in something once I've done it. So if I'd stayed with that, who knows? I could have become a nightclub entrepreneur or something, but I just don't have it. And I really admire people who do. I've got friends who are entrepreneurs. I've got friends who set up their own businesses, and they are cut from a slightly different cloth from me. And they can find great interest in what I do, and I can be absolutely fascinated by what they do. And one thing I didn't understand as a younger person, was, and I used to think this was a flaw or a failing in the entrepreneurial spirit, is it doesn't really matter what you're doing. You don't have to have a passion for the product if you have a passion for the process. So I would like to run a successful business. And then I would say, well, what do you want to do? And they'd say, well, it doesn't really matter. I want to run a successful business. It doesn't matter whether it's a cleaning business or a chain of bookshops. I want to run a successful business. That's one type of entrepreneur. Another type of entrepreneur will turn a passion into a business, or they will turn an enthusiasm into a business, or they'll simply spot a gap in a market and possess the skills to fill it. But it's a mindset that I don't have, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I'm perfectly happy about that. I don't know. Has Rishi Sunak ever set up a business? Did he set up? Was he? I mean, I know he went to work for other hedge funds, and then he went to work for Goldman Sachs. Did he have his own fund? Because usually they go off. Jacob Rees-Mogg's hedge fund. He was funded originally by a bloke called Crispin Odey, who is worth looking up. Odey. He's the reason why Jacob Rees-Mogg is a wealthy, very, very wealthy man today. I don't know whether Sunak got set up on his own as a hedgie. Did he? I mean, does it count as setting up a business? You just need somebody to give you a ton of money to invest on their behalf, and then you're away. You're in business. But I don't think he's done it himself. He said something yesterday that I can't currently quite get my head around. We talk a lot about politicians being out of touch, don't we? And we know what that means. You can be out of touch from one end of the social strata, like 30p Leenock, who just sort of dismisses the need for food banks or claims that you can have a 5-course meal every night for 12.5 pence. And then you've got out of touch at the other end. So that's a sort of out of touchness born of ignorance and bigotry, a sort of boneheaded out of touchness, an inability to see as far as the end of your own nose, and a sort of innate dislike of other human beings because you're so miserable yourself that what is happening inside comes outside eventually. But then you've got a different kind of out of touchness, which is historically misattributed to Marie Antoinette saying, let them eat cake. So they've run out of bread, ma'am. Well, why can't they eat cake? Which is not historically accurate any more than the widely accepted story of King Canute is historically accurate. But we'll work on the widely understood premise of that example. She was so out of touch with the experiences of ordinary people that she thought if they'd run out of bread, they could eat brioche. They could eat the sort of sweeter, slightly longer lasting bread that got mistranslated into English as cake. And it probably wasn't her that said it either. And you sort of find yourself thinking, well, what experience of normal life would you have to understand why that person over there hasn't set up their own business? And I realised looking at Rishi Sunak's comments that I don't have that experience either. So shall I tell you what he said? He said that he wants more people to be willing to give up the security of a regular paycheck and be comfortable with failure. And I still can't quite get my head around that. He wants more people to give up the security of a regular paycheck and start their own businesses in the knowledge that they are likely to fail. I think more new businesses fail than succeed. And it used to be a bit of a truism that your average highly successful entrepreneur had 3 or 4 false starts before they finally found their groove and managed to build a business that was hugely successful. Unafraid. He wants people to be unafraid to give up the security of a regular paycheck, to go and start something and be comfortable with failure. And I think that might be absolutely horrific. I think it might be, but I don't want to jump to conclusions. I think it might be evidence of somebody who can't even conceive of not being able even to dream of giving up your regular paycheck. Because if you give up your regular paycheck on Friday, you will have no money to spend on Monday. How are you going to set up a business if you can't even buy food? How many of us are living in a way that we used to call hand to mouth, but we don't anymore? But essentially, almost all that's coming in is going out again. So what does he mean when he says to give up the comfort of a regular paycheck? He means people who could afford to not get paid next month and the month after and the month after, and however many months it would take to get a business off the ground and start earning an income, brackets only hopefully close brackets, that would eventually supersede the income you were getting from your regular paycheck. Because, look, satisfaction and fulfillment aside, there's not much point doing this unless you're going to end up, or unless you think you're going to end up earning more from your new business than you are from your regular paycheck. So there are two things about Sunak that I find sinisterly significant, right? And I don't know whether I'm putting too much weight on these. The first was when he couldn't use a debit card. Now, he was still relatively wet behind the ears. He wasn't used to being followed around everywhere with cameras, I don't think. And he may have been nervous. He may not be natural interacting with people. But he appeared in a petrol station where he'd borrowed someone else's car to pretend that he was filling it with petrol and looked like a normal. He appeared in the petrol station kiosk to be unfamiliar with the process of paying for things with a debit card. Now, the reason why I say I'm not so sure about that is because I can't quite see how you can reach his age in this world without being familiar with the workings of a debit card. Even if you've got people to polish your shoes and wipe your bottom every morning, there are going to be moments in the day where the Queen famously didn't carry cash, right? But that's the Queen. I'm sure Rupert Murdoch knows how to use a credit card or a debit card. I'm sure he's familiar. I'm sure Elon Musk is familiar with click and collect, or maybe not click and collect. He's got people to do the collecting, but he's familiar with the process of the clicking. So I'm not sure that it's fair to cite the apparent unfamiliarity with the process of using a debit card to pay for petrol as evidence of him inhabiting a universe so far removed from the average voter that he might as well be on Pluto. And the second one was when he was in a homeless shelter. In fact, can we dig that out? Because that is an astonishing moment for me. All of the little fears and reservations I have about giving him a coating for the debit card moment, they just disappear. Was he a bit nervous? Was he a bit uncomfortable? Is he bad at social interactions? I don't care. If you're working in a homeless shelter giving someone their breakfast, you don't say, "Are you in business?" You just don't, do you? I mean, that's a level of tin-earedness that I think most script editors would send back to the scriptwriter and say, no. You're trying to do a latter-day Marie Antoinette and she's doing a shift in a homeless shelter because the cameras are there, and someone comes to the front of the queue asking for his eggs and bacon, and Marie Antoinette says, "Are you in business? Êtes-vous en commerce?" The scriptwriter says, "No, don't be daft. She's in a homeless shelter. She's not going to ask someone if they're in business." Yeah, she might be daft, but she's not completely devoid of the most basic spark of empathy and intelligence. But Rishi Sunak apparently is. And I bring all of that to this question because I don't fail to understand it completely. There were many successful businesses would have involved enormous risk at the very beginning for the people that took it, and many failed businesses would have involved enormous risk at the very beginning for the people that founded it. But I think he's describing, and Dave in Glasgow agrees, I think he's describing something quite American. And Dave concludes that makes him delusional. This kind of thing might go on in America, but it just doesn't suit our culture. Whereas others might argue that what he's calling for is a change in our culture. Dave writes, "I've started a few businesses, James. I'm not a millionaire, but I've done okay. Failing at starting businesses is okay in the US, but we don't have the same culture here in the UK. Sunak is delusional. So if the bank's going to take the risk, I'll start a business, right? But if my house is on the line, I'm simply not going to do it, because if I lose my house, I'll have nowhere to live. If Rishi Sunak loses his house, he'll move into one of his other houses." That's the bit. So what is it like to give up the secure? I'd love to know, because how many people who've given up the security of a regular paycheck did so because they knew they had enough salted away to actually give them a fair crack of the whip at starting their own business? I forget what the figures are for people that don't even have a spare £100, never mind a spare £1,000, but the figures are stunning. I mean, truly stunning. I'll dig them out for you, actually, so that you know. You can't give up your regular paycheck if you're Mr. McCorber, can you? You can't give up your regular paycheck if everything that's coming in is going out again. Because what are you going to live on for the next 6 months? What are the family going to live on for the next 6 months? So who is he actually talking about? Question 1, 0345 6060 973. And working on the premise that having a Prime Minister who appears to have very little... having a Prime Minister who has no understanding of what life is like for voters is an objectively bad thing. You can learn what life is like for voters, but he hasn't shown much interest in doing that. I would ask you, how bad is it that he has said this? And don't forget that you can answer in good faith. It's not bad at all, James. There's a couple of points that you're missing. So I want to know what you think about his words, what he said, what his words say about him. I want to know who he's talking to, who actually can give up the security of a regular paycheck. That's crucial, this. Don't ring me and tell me that you've got a side hustle or that you've started a little job. You've given up the security of a regular paycheck. Those are his words, not mine. I think that's important. I don't want to sound too strict, but good luck to you if you're doing something on the side. That's not what he is talking about. Who can give up this? I'm not sure I could give up the security of a regular paycheck at this point in my life, and I'm doing better than I've ever done before. I'm well into the 1%. I'm not boasting. I'm being honest with you because I'm asking you to be honest with me. I don't think I could give up the security of a regular paycheck at the moment. So what is he talking about, and who is he talking to? 0345 6060 973. It's 18 minutes after 11.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Here's the clip from the homeless shelter. This is the Prime Minister asking a bloke queuing up for breakfast in a homeless shelter if he is in business.
Some toast? Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Couple of eggs? Yeah. Fantastic. Now, you've been here before, have you?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great place, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a superb job. Right, that's that. That's some cutlery. Let me get. We've got a bottle of
the economy out.
Well, that is exactly what I'm trying to do. Exactly what I'm trying to do.
There's for business.
What do you have? Do you work in a business? Do you want some fruit?
I'm homeless, and I'm actually a homeless person at the minute, but I'm interested in business.
Yeah, so. What kind of business?
I like finance. It's good for the city, and when finance and stuff's doing well, we'll do well, don't we, in London? So
yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. So I used to work in finance, actually.
Yeah, I heard.
Yeah.
Ex-investment bank.
Yeah, well, I did lots of different things, but you're right. Because I think the good thing now is it's not just London. If you look at all the jobs in finance around the UK, the majority of them are outside of London now. Yeah. So it's spread across the UK.
The law and the association.
Yeah. Is that something you'd like to get into?
I wouldn't mind. But I don't know. I'd like to get through Christmas first.
Yeah. What's the plan? What are you doing this weekend?
No idea. I'm hoping that the St Mungo's can help me get into some temporary accommodation so I'm not on the street.
And that's a real moment for the ages, isn't it? Because he meant well there. He's quite Tiggerish. What about you? Do you want to get into business? Well, I'm just trying to get through Christmas first. That's Dickensian, right? And I'm not suggesting Sunak is a Scrooge-like character, because if you live in a box, then you're going to be out of touch with everything outside the box. And these early encounters that he's had with normal people are remarkable. But hold that in your mind and contrast it with this exchange yesterday from his bizarre interview with Elon Musk.
We need talent, we need people. So that means an education system that prioritizes the things that matter. And you've seen my reforms. I go on about more maths. But I think that is important. But also attracting the best and the brightest here. If you look at our fastest growing companies in this country, and I think it's probably the same in the US, over half of them have a non-British founder. Right, and so that tells you we've got to be a place that is open to the world's best and brightest entrepreneurial talent. So the visa regime that we've put in place, I think, does that, makes it easy for those people to come here. And then actually it's the thing that we spent the beginning of the session talking about, the regulation, right? Making sure that we've got a regulatory system that's pro-innovation, that, of course we always need guardrails on the things that will worry us, but we've got to create a space for people to innovate and do different things. Those are all my jobs. The thing that is tougher is the thing that Elon talked about, which is culture, right? It's how do you transpose that culture from places like Silicon Valley across the world where people are unafraid to give up the security of a regular paycheck to go and start something and be comfortable with failure. You talked about that a lot. I think you talked about it more when you were playing games, right? But you've got to be comfortable failing and knowing that that's just part of the process. And that is a tricky cultural thing to do overnight, but it's an important part of, I think, creating that kind of environment.
Yeah, if you don't succeed with your first startup, it shouldn't be a sort of a catastrophic career-ending thing. It should be, well, good. I think generally should be like, well, you gave it a good shot, and now try again.
Exactly. And it's
25 minutes after 11 is the time. Are we being unfair to him? Do you understand what he's talking about? Or does he simply not grasp that for almost all of us, giving up our paycheck, not running a side hustle, giving up our paycheck to start a business and being comfortable with failure would somehow be easy? Janet's in Thamesmead. Janet, what would you like to say?
I think you've used most of the examples I was going to use.
Oh, yeah. A likely story. Go on.
I think Rishi Sunak might be a nice person, but he lives on a total different planet to the rest of us. Do you remember that Harry Enfield character, Tim Nice but Dim?
Of course I do. I went to school with him.
Oh, did you?
No, I didn't. I mean, I went to school with people like him.
But he reminds me of that. He hasn't got a clue. And it's not his fault he hasn't got a clue, but he hasn't got a clue. A lot of people in this country are living hand to mouth.
5 million people haven't got 100 quid set aside. 5 million people.
No, that's right. They're relying on their next wage to feed their kids. They can't give that up to try a business. They can't do without a wage for even 1 month.
All right, so he's not talking about them, but are there lots of people that perhaps do fit into the category that he's talking about?
Well, they're people who probably come from quite a wealthy family in the first place.
Yes.
I mean, in that clip you saw of him when he was really young, he said, I don't know any working class people.
It was worse than that. No, it was worse than that. He said, well, I've got upper class friends, I've got middle class friends, I've got working class friends. Well, maybe not working class. Well, not working class. It was worse than saying that. Bless him.
He's talking about his mates who come from quite wealthy families, and that's who he's mixed with.
That's
he
all
hasn't
he's
got
ever
a
known.
Clue.
But I went to public school, and I don't think I could give up a regular paycheck right now, not the one I'm getting, and set up a business from scratch.
No, I think most people can't. I think the people who can maybe is like youngsters who live at home with quite middle class. Middle class parents.
Or people who've got a trust fund, or people who own their own home outright. And even with interest rates, presumably it's harder to think about setting up a business now than it has been for nearly 20 years.
Yeah, but I think normal working class and like lower middle class or middle class people, they haven't got the wherewithal to do that, and I don't think he knows that. I don't think he's got a clue.
You're a kind person, aren't you? Because I sometimes go in the opposite direction, but we both agree that he's up the chimney on this one. But it doesn't make him a bad person. It's just not ideal for the Prime Minister to be so completely detached from the lives of the people he ostensibly governs, is it?
Well, we're talking about Sunak. If we were talking about Boris, I wouldn't be so kind.
Well, nor would I. Nor would I. In fact, someone asked me a question in Southampton last night about Boris Johnson, and it was so rude. I laughed so hard, my poppy pinged off my lapel. I just hope there weren't any newspapers there to take a picture of me shortly after my poppy pinged off my lapel and claim that I did it in order to avoid offending Muslims, which the Daily Telegraph has genuinely tried to do today. It's a story worth picking up on, actually, because a spokesman for the leader of the Labour Party categorically stated, after someone pointed out that he had a poppy on in the morning and didn't have a poppy on in the afternoon when he filmed a video message about Islamophobia. A spokesman for Sir Keir Starmer said it was absolutely not purposely removed. And remember, I speak as someone whose poppy literally pinged off on a stage last night. You might have the poppy on your coat, but you forget to transfer it to your jacket. Rishi Sunak was on stage with Elon Musk yesterday. He wasn't wearing a poppy. Can you believe that? But he was in his shirt sleeves trying to look normal, so I think it's more than likely that he had a poppy attached to the jacket that he wasn't wearing. So there are a million reasons why you might end up being filmed not wearing a poppy, despite the fact that you normally wear one. Not if you're writing for the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph. From somewhere, they have conjured up the idea that he did it because of fears that it could have negative connotations for some Muslim voters. As if there isn't enough tension in this corner of society at the moment. As if there isn't enough division abroad at the minute. Writers at the Daily Mail and the Daily Telegraph have today completely invented, plucked it out of the sky, the idea that he wasn't wearing a poppy in one context and was wearing a poppy in another context because he was worried about avoiding Muslim voters. Demonstrating abject ignorance of the British Indian Army, of course, in which I think the largest religious constituent was Muslims. Muslims fought on the British side in the Second World War in their tens, if not hundreds of thousands. But hey ho, they can accuse Keir Starmer of. I'll read it to you. Last night he was facing criticism because of fears it could have negative connotations for some Muslim voters. So you go to a spokesman for the Labour leader, right? And you ask them, is that why? And if they're mealy-mouthed and they say, oh, well, we can't comment on that, I don't know, then you think to yourself, oh, well, maybe there is something in this apparent hill of beans. But a spokesman for Keir Starmer literally said it was absolutely not purposely removed. Do you think that is clear enough or not? Or do you think there's still some wriggle room there? It was absolutely not purposely removed. The content of the video had nothing to do with him not wearing a poppy. Well, you can see that's very mealy-mouthed, isn't it? I mean, it's a lot of wiggle room there. How desperate do you have to be at the Mail and the Telegraph to conjure that? It's the same people that did the curry, isn't it? It's the same people that did the flipping curry. It's as if we've learned nothing. The people that kept telling you that Keir Starmer's curry was a significant story while Boris Johnson was in Downing Street suggesting that we could cure COVID by sticking hairdryers up our nose are now trying to pretend that it's not even attacking Keir Starmer. It's got a fat side order of Islamophobia as well, hasn't it? By sort of suggesting that Muslims don't like the poppy. Ah, man. If only someone had just written a book about how widespread and disgusting this kind of nonsense is. Oh, they have. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
36 minutes after 11 is the time. And I think in the 12 o'clock hour, I've got quite a good idea for a phone-in. I don't know if you're gonna like it, but I'm going to ask whether you ever had a pet rabbit butchered in a mafia-style warning to your ex-girlfriend. So if you know anyone who is in that category, give them, and they're not listening to the show at the moment, give them a quick heads up. They'll go straight to the front of the queue. 11:36 is the time. Sunak and startups. The idea that there are lots and lots of people who could, if only they had the right mental attitude, give up the security of a regular paycheck, set up their own business and be comfortable with failure. James is in Wandsworth. James, what would you like to say?
I would like to say that I think it's quite a bad idea when it's made simple in that way. But I think the
easy. He makes it sound easy, doesn't he? That's the thing.
Makes it sound easy, which is just is ridiculous. Many people, you can't overnight quit your job and start a business. For many people, it just can't be done. However, I do think the overall points around people perhaps sort of believing in themselves and going out and doing their own thing, I think that's a very, very valid point from my experience.
Yes, I agree. What is your experience?
Well, I was working full time. I was an estate agent. I've been with my company for 13 years.
Yeah.
So very sort of quite established, quite safe, I guess. And I got to the point where I thought I can't do this forever. So to cut a long story short, I did 2 years of night school to study electrics.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, I sort of set up my own company. So while I was working, I was studying, and on the side, sort of weekends, evenings, days off, doing my own thing as well. And sort of grew that while I was still working and still had the money coming in. And then it got to a point where eventually I could say, I can do this full time, which is probably the wiser thing to do.
So you're spinning 2 plates for a while until the second plate starts spinning fast enough for you to
4 plates.
3 4 plates. Many plates.
Two children. One being a newborn. Night school, working. It's hard. It's very, very difficult, and I think that's what a lot of people do need to understand is it's not easy, but it can be done. And if you believe in yourself, or you believe in some, I won't say something more. You're more yourself.
Yeah.
It can be done, but it's very, very difficult.
And what's the difference for you? Why is it so much more fulfilling? Is it the work, or is it the fact that it's your business, or a bit of both?
Both. One thing, I got to an age, it might sound a bit silly, I just didn't like being told what to do. So that
doesn't sound silly at all, mate.
No, well, I just thought, especially, it's all right. For me, it was fine when I was young. When you're 20, 25, having a boss, being told where to go, what to do, what to say, what not to say, it's all very fine. It's all fun.
Yes.
But, when you're a dad, you got, I started to think, do I want to be doing this when I'm 40, 50?
Yeah.
No. What can I do? Not a lot. Okay, I need to retrain. That's the other thing is, if you don't like what you're doing, there's even more reason to sort of get up, get out and do something different.
Yes.
Or do the same thing but for yourself.
Yes.
And, people think about businesses as employing people and having a business like premises. It doesn't have to be that at all. It can be something sort of quite low key. You can do it from home, or you can, do it yourself. It doesn't have to be elaborate. You don't need to day one employ 10 people.
You can just be a one-man band, but you're washing your own face. Washing your own face instead of giving the fruits of your labour to somebody else. So in some ways, the problem here is that he makes it sound a little bit easy, and probably the idea of being comfortable with failure is the big problem. Because
failure. Yeah. Well, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, failure for me was sticking with what I was doing. In my mind,
but what if you'd set up? Well, you'd have been all right, but you'd have been even more unhappy because you'd have had a glimpse of the greener grass on the other side, and then it had withered and died, and the business didn't work, and you're back to what you were doing before.
It's very, very scary. When people have got rents, mortgages, which most people have,
well, for sure. Yes.
And that's just the start of people's bills. That's before you get onto council tax, food. The list goes on. It's very, very expensive to live. But what my advice to people would be smart. Don't just quit your job and think you're going to get paid day one. The other thing about
we need to clarify that. I mean, it is do not take the Prime Minister's advice and give up the security of a regular paycheck.
I'd take his advice in believing in yourself.
For sure.
I think that's definitely a point there. But in terms of how you do it, just be smart. I think when you start your own business, money doesn't come in day one. When you're doing your own thing, you might wait, depending on who you're working for, you might wait a month or 2 months from after doing the job to getting paid, and that really interrupts your cash flow.
Well,
that's another thing to think about. But if you have a plan and you're smart about how you do it, it can be done.
So I like your attitude. I think that's an important call because I do speak a lot on this program about people who've been raised to know their place, and that can be an incredibly restrictive worldview and a tragic one. It's a cousin of deference, isn't it? It's a cousin of cap doffing. So just because you are you doesn't mean you shouldn't think about setting up your own business. But of course, because you are you and not Rishi Sunak, you would probably not be able to do it by giving up your regular job, by giving up the security of a regular paycheck. But yeah, I think you're in the middle ground, and it's important to recognise that for an awful lot of people, it would be a life-changing experience to be master or mistress of their own destiny. 11:42 is the time. We go back to the homeless shelter, don't we? Because we don't know how that lad ended up there. But I wonder whether Rishi Sunak would tell him, as he is trying to find somewhere outside to sleep tonight, would Rishi Sunak hold him up as an example of someone who was comfortable with failure? Tina's in Bourne End. Tina, what would you like to say?
Hi. Firstly, I would like to say thank you so much, James. You have got me through Brexit. You have got me through this Brexit inquiry or the pandemic inquiry, and you basically are a voice of sanity when sometimes I think I'm going mad.
You're very kind. Thank you, Tina. It cuts both ways, so thank you as well.
And I'm coming to your book launch next week. But
Fantastic.
Anyway, the reason why I phoned is I've never phoned you before. I've wanted to, but I've never phoned. But I was so angry when I heard what he said yesterday. The phrase tone deaf comes to mind.
Yes.
And I think what is has been obvious when we've been listening to the inquiry about the pandemic and about this government is that they do not have a clue. I live in a very affluent area. My children have had huge opportunities. I'm very lucky. They went to grammar schools. They both went to universities. They both have good jobs. I had my youngest phone me up in tears, even though she knows that she's incredibly lucky and has a job and is doing really well, because she, unlike a lot of her friends, doesn't have a parent that can afford to buy her a house in London. Cannot give her an internship, cannot give her access. She can't take the job she wants because, Mum, I can't afford to do something I love because I have to pay the rent, because I need a job, and because and she wasn't blaming me, but I felt the blame.
Yeah.
She said, Mum, I can't just give up. I can't afford my rent otherwise. I can't afford to live. She says, I have a really good job. I have £50 after I've paid my rent for the rest of the month to live. And this is my child who's got a first from university, from a red brick university. And she has parents who are not broke, who can give her stuff. And she's had opportunities. These kids are struggling against a system that they cannot beat. And I work in the arts as well. And there you have a community of kids who have infinite belief in themselves, who are creating work that supports the society, who are constantly living on nothing. They have no access to art. And increasingly, the access to the arts is not based on talent or ability, but is based on the fact that their parents can pay for their fees. And when I think about what that's happening, there would be people like Mark Rylance and God knows how many other people that could not get into the arts, Eddie Marsan, all these other people, because they cannot afford the fees.
It's very true.
It breaks my heart.
It breaks my heart as well, as I'm sure you know, and it does actually tally with what he was saying yesterday. It's the value that they put on things, and talking about we need the right people, maths, but it's incredibly tone deaf, because society benefits from culture in ways that are immeasurable and uncountable, and yet this lot seem to have a problem, A, with learning for learning's sake, and B, with culture, certainly with subsidising culture and helping people from backgrounds that aren't incredibly moneyed to get into businesses where they will flourish and succeed and make money, but they won't get into them without some start at the beginning. Has it been a shock to you as your daughter got older? Because if I were to defend very, very mildly Rishi Sunak, I would point out that the world has changed since he was leaving school or since he was leaving university. And there were more things in reach for more people when I left university 25 years ago than there are now. And so sometimes I make the mistake of talking as if for someone who's 26 now, it's a bit like it was for me when I was 26. Do you see what I mean? Has it taken your daughter's experience for you to realise how big this gap has got?
I think, definitely.
Yeah.
My husband and I, when I gave up my job, I was lucky enough to be able to give up my job. I devoted myself to my kids. I gave them everything that they could have within our purview. But the most important thing for me was education, because I was lucky enough. I got pulled out of a school in East Acton. I used to say bread and butter.
Yeah.
There's
nothing wrong with that.
I had a headmaster that, dragged me out by the scruff of my neck, and I got sent to Godolphin and Latimer. I was very lucky. I was at school with, Hugh Grant, Samantha Bond, and Nigella Lawson. I had my eyes open to the fact.
And why shouldn't everybody? So you're like me on that. It's conscious of luck and serendipity, but also of the path not taken. The Tina who didn't get that opportunity, who didn't get that luck. And Sunak seems very comfortable speaking only to people on the right side of inequality. I think that's probably the best way of putting it. Because if you're on the wrong side of inequality, the idea of giving up the security of a regular paycheck and being comfortable with failure is absolutely bonkers.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
If I read you something, I read you 4 lines of a story, I wonder if you'll be able to spot the elements of this story that explain my interest in it. All right? So A film charting the life of Tony DeVee, one of dance music's biggest names, will be premiered in Birmingham later. This is a story from earlier in the week on BBC West Midlands. Have you spotted it yet? Well, part of the screening of Don't Ever Stop takes place at the Midlands Arts Centre in Cannon Hill Park. London premiere was last night, by the way. Born in Kidderminster, DeVee made his name at the Nightingale Club in Birmingham in the late 1980s and then went on to DJ at iconic clubs like London's Heaven. And this film is very special for a whole heap of reasons that we will now explore. Firstly, with Tony's sister Jane Parks, who I should say is a great friend of mine, and I also had the enormous privilege of dancing to Tony at Heaven back in what the kids like to call the day. This is bonkers.
It really is, yes. Something I never thought would happen, yeah.
Why are people still so enamoured of your late brother?
I genuinely really don't know. It's just... I just don't know. 25 years ago he died. So he had a blue plaque last year. First one of the so-called superstar DJs to get one.
Yes.
And it's on the Custard Factory wall in Birmingham.
Ridiculous.
So and I thought, that's the pinnacle. That's it. And then this has come along and I can't quite believe it, actually. It's been an absolute rollercoaster ride of emotions, being proud. It's just been a wonderful experience.
Tell me about the first time you saw the film. Tell me.
Well, I didn't see it before. I could have done, but I saw it on Monday with everyone else. So, to be fair, we cried all the way through, basically. And then right at the end, we stood up, me and my daughter and my son and my husband were there. And we stood up and thought, oh, good, I can dry my eyes now and go and have a drink. And a lady came across to me and she said, hello, Jane, do you remember me? And I said, oh, no. She said, I was one of the nurses that nursed Tony when he was in hospital. Of course, we just all burst into tears again. She'd come on her own to see it. And she said it was a wonderful film and everything they said about him in the film, she said was true. He was a lovely man. So that really made my night on Monday at the premiere.
I bet it did. Because, I mean, for a DJ, it was an odd way to actually have connections with people beyond the dance floor. I don't know how he did that. I don't know how people felt they knew him.
Yeah. Well, at the time, back in the 90s, it was straight clubs, gay clubs.
Yeah.
And this was one of the main reasons he got his blue plaque, because sort of he mixed the crowds. Yeah. The gay and straight crowds mixed then, because he was a openly gay DJ playing in the straight clubs. So the gay people went to the straight clubs and it mixed all of a sudden in the 90s. It mixed, and I don't think he was aware that he did that, but he really did do that. And so I think that's
He did it for me before I knew he was from Kidderminster and before I knew you as well. So, yes. I mean, completely independently of any personal connections. It's the first time I went to a gay club.
Yeah, you went to Trade, didn't you?
Oh, I went to Trade as well,
yes,
of course.
Yeah.
Oh, those were the days. Before things let's have a little listen to a trailer for the film and then we'll speak to Stuart Pollitt, who directed it.
You would know Tony in the first record. It was like a magic happened.
The most, to me, electrified DJ that has ever walked the planet.
Are we fans of Tony DeVee?
We are top boys. He is the man. He's the god. We worship him.
I would be in the DJ booth and God love him, he never told me to f*** off.
He was a young kid. Yeah, I thought to myself, this kid's got talent. And Tony took a shine to him.
We were just mad about the music, mad about Tony.
He created a kind of mood, a sound, almost a movement.
You knew when he was on because it would go into overdrive.
I can feel that in my spine. Stuart Pollitt, you directed this documentary. What, you weren't there, were you? You look far too young.
Not quite, James. I was aware of Tony. I wasn't old enough to actually get into the various clubs that you're talking about. Neither was my co-producer Phil, but he was a huge fan of that scene, and he tells the story from the early 2000s where he was in a club and they played records from Tony, and there were these stories going around about this sort of mythical DJ who was on the cusp of becoming the biggest in the world and then died.
Yeah.
And there was also this story about his mentor, someone who he helped, called Fergie, who was then one of the biggest DJs in the UK in this point in the early 2000s. And there was this story about the two of them that my co-producer was told 20 years ago and always had in his mind as something that would make a film. And we, having worked for the BBC for a long time as staff, we set up our own company 4 or 5 years ago, which, amongst other things, does give you the freedom to explore stories that you want to tell. And so we worked on this and built up the contacts, thankfully, through Jane, to try and develop that story. And Fergie was really keen to talk about what happened with Tony and how their relationship sort of changed and developed, and produced for us what I think is really amazing sort of human story beyond the music and the scene and everything like that. It's a story of two people, two different generations helping each other.
What's the plan for the film? What are you hoping will happen next?
So we've had some really good receptions at both the premieres this week, or both of them sold out. Hugely positive reaction. We've got a couple of screenings in Birmingham next week as well. Then we're planning to take it to more cinemas around the country, hopefully early next year, and then potentially, with a bit of luck, get it onto broadcaster or a streamer. Because obviously, when you make something like this, you want as many people as possible to be able to see it and hopefully enjoy it. So that's the aim and that's the ambition.
How can people keep track of the tale, Stuart? How can people follow what's going on?
Absolutely. We've got a website, TonyDeVFilm.com, and on social media as well. So we will update on there everything when there's next screenings and next opportunities for people to view it and buy tickets. So if they can log on to the website or follow us on social media at Tony DeVee Film.
Top man. And of course, the V is spelt VIT, which any former ravers will not need me to point out, that people coming to it a little newer may need it. Stuart, thank you, and good luck and congratulations. Don't ever stop. It's just growing now. The story's only just started. Briefly, Jane, how did he get into DJing? Because, I was in my bedroom in Kidderminster at about the same time, and I certainly wasn't doing any DJing.
Well, he started when he was at school, really. He just had a mobile disco. Go around Kidderminster doing weddings and stuff.
He didn't do the roller disco, did he? Ever up near Wire Glades?
Might have done. Oh no, I think he was a bit old for that.
And he just had a proper
so when
gift.
he came out as gay, he moved to Birmingham, really. So he then got a residency at the Nightingale, which was the big gay club in Birmingham. And it went from there, really. They sort of told him to tone his music down, and so he wouldn't, so they got rid of him. And it did him a huge favour, really, because then all this exploded on the dance scene, in the 90s, and he was one of those at the forefront of that. So it was a great time for him.
And finally, what would he make of all this fuss?
God. He'd be so embarrassed by it all. He was really humble, but secretly he'd love it. He would love it.
You can find out more about Don't Ever Stop by following that social media and website, TonyDeVFilm.com. Jane, thank you so much. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We may take a little bit more because, in fact, Stuart talking about finding the wherewithal to give up the regular paycheck and start your own company ties in a little with what we were discussing before this item. And I'm also drawn to a story about children no longer walking to school for reasons that I will explain to you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 3 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Guess who's joining us a little later this hour? By popular request, actually. Do you remember at the very beginning of the COVID outbreak when we were talking to John Ashton, Professor John Ashton, who'd been a sort of Lord High Panjandrum in public health up in Liverpool, and he was deeply concerned about what he was seeing. He was quite shabbily treated, I think, by some corners of the media. We'll double check on that, but that's my memory, certainly. I don't think I've checked with him about how he felt, including an appearance on Question Time. And now that essentially these inquiries are demonstrating that even the most unlikely sounding critics of the government were probably not going far enough in their fears of how Boris Johnson and his colleagues were responding to this unprecedented threat, are being vindicated on a scale they can't even have dreamt of. I and you felt it might be a good day to catch up with him. So we'll do that last thing today. We'll do that after 12:45. I used to love these stories. I suppose it's because my children are getting older, so I don't see myself in them anymore. But as they get older, of course, you've got similar concerns on a different level. When do you start letting them, stay in the house on their own if you're away? When do you start letting them go to all-nighters? Seeing as we were talking about Tony DeVee a moment ago, I think the mention of an all-nighter or going off to a festival. So we're dealing with all that now. But fewer children are walking to school than 6 years ago when targets were set to increase the number. I don't remember the targets being set. It was the Department of Transport who wanted to double the number of school children cycling to school, and they wanted a 6 percentage point increase in the proportion of children walking to school. We have seen, it is reported today, no sustained increase in cycling rates and an actual diminishment in the number of children who now walk to school. It's crazy, really, because the government's own estimates show that every pound invested in active travel reaps around £4.30 in benefits in health, air quality and decarbonisation. So I want to know why. I want to know why this hasn't worked. I can't quite establish whether or not money has already been spent and they're not getting the returns that they expected, or whether they're looking for more money and that's why they're revealing that things are not going very, very well. The targets were supposed to increase the percentage of children aged 5 to 10 from 49% in 2014 to 55% by 2025. And it appears to have failed pretty miserably, because the number has actually gone down, not up. Certainly the number of cyclists has gone up by not by enough, and the number of children walking has gone down. So I don't just want to talk about walking to school. I was at boarding school, so it wasn't really an option for me, walking to school. You didn't have any choice. I want to know why your child doesn't walk to school. I want to know whether it's because they don't want to, or whether it's because you don't want them to. One of the strangest things, and I talked about this a moment ago with, was it Tina, about how we all fall into the trap of thinking that the world for 12-year-olds today is like the world was when we were 12. We kind of, or the world for 25-year-olds is like the world. The big penny drop moment for me was talking about university, actually, and I suddenly realised that if I'd had to take out 30 grand worth of debt or thereabouts in order to do my degree, then my attitude to my studies and to university in general would probably have been profoundly different from the attitude that I have. You can see why. I think what caught me first was the notion of students being furious when a lecturer didn't turn up. Whereas for my generation, not all people of my age, but for everyone I knocked about with at college, if the lecturer didn't turn up, that was fantastic. That was a win, and we all went down to the student union bar. But if you were paying thousands and thousands of pounds that you were likely or possibly going to have to pay back at some point in the future, you'd have a very different relationship with education. You'd have a very different relationship with the institution. And yet, we all kind of know that freedom and independence are really, really healthy. We all know that the best way to minimize anxiety is exposure. If you're frightened of the outside world, the best way to become less frightened is to be out in it a lot. In it. And that's why we end up as parents almost in a state of cognitive dissonance. We called it helicopter parenting, didn't we? Or cotton wool parenting. And the idea that you don't allow your children a fraction of the freedoms that you had as a child. And it doesn't necessarily make sense. There's way more cars on the road than there was when I was growing up in the 1970s, but not that many more than there were perhaps in the noughties or the 90s. So every generation of parents seems to, since the 1970s or the 1980s, every generation of parents seems to dial down the amount of freedom that they allow their own children. So, I don't know, latchkey kids, how much freedom? Yeah, so it peaked, I guess, in the 70s. Prior to that, there wasn't that much concern. Children would disappear for hours on end during the school holidays. They'd be expected to make their own way to and from school because there was no alternative. It was, depending on which decade you look at, there'd either be no car or one car. And Dad had that to get to himself to work and back. So, there was no alternative to walking or cycling to school. Schools have got further away from homes, probably, on a greater scale. But there are going to be other answers to these questions. So the little question is, why doesn't your child walk to school? All right, 0345 6060 973. And does it actually really annoy you or upset you, but you feel that is the way things have to be? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. The second question is the big one. And that is, why do we give our children fewer freedoms than we had ourselves? Why do we do that? 24-hour news? How much did things change with the Madeleine McCann story? I remember when I was covering the Madeleine McCann story, only on here, not as a proper journalist, like, out in Portugal or something like that. When we were talking about the Madeleine McCann story here, I took loads of calls from people about what things were like 10, 20, 30 years previously. And the one that always stayed with me was the one about holiday camps. Because if you were staying in a holiday camp, you would tie something to the door handle of your chalet that alerted everybody else to the fact that your child was sleeping in the chalet. So when you went for dinner, if a child was crying, you'd tell the DJ, although not a DJ in the Tony DeVito, or the MC, you'd say there's a child crying in Chalet 14, and they would like in Heidi High, they go ding, 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 there is a child crying in Chalet 14, would say Gladys Pugh, ding, 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 Heidi High. And then you'd go off and deal with your own child. And if you set that against the sort of low-level paranoia that all parents feel now, you probably find that hard to believe. You're going to have to check with your nan if she ever went to Butlins. But that was not even questionable behaviour. That was completely normal behaviour. So what's changed? Why do you give your child measurably and considerably less freedom than your mum and dad gave you, or your carer or mum or dad gave you? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. You may not even have thought about it. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it in a second. And then you've got the other possibility that you're pretty good at this. In some ways, I'm really interested in talking to you as well. You really do make an effort to give your children space and freedom, to put them in scenarios where they will develop perhaps resilience or independence is a better word, isn't it? How does that go down with other parents? And what if your child is the only child that's allowed to walk to school? How does that go down with other parents? Do they think you're irresponsible? Do they think you're outrageous? Are they jealous? I mean, how does it work? How does it work? And I mean, as if that's not enough to get us going, do you think your parents were too cautious with you when you were younger? This is, I presume, going to be confined to people in their 20s and possibly 30s. But that looking at when this phenomenon seems to have taken hold, do you look back and think possibly part of the reason that you're a little bit anxious, a little bit more anxious than you want to be, or a little bit more uncomfortable in some situations than you want to be, is because your parents were so closely protective of you when you were little? I never walked to school. God, no. So when you went away to work or you went away to college, it was really, really traumatic because you'd never had that level of independence before. I don't know. There's loads of possibilities there, and you can pick all or any of them. 0345 6060 973. I hope this is a joke rather than an application for Idiot's Corner. The award for the most offensive. Oh, I see. Yes, the way that whenever I do a Welsh accent, I thought you'd written West Indian accent instead of Welsh Indian. It was Welsh. It was Gladys Pugh from Heidi High, obviously, but not obviously at all. That's the problem, isn't it? What do you use as an explanation for the fact that you know that children benefit from independence and freedom, but you're not giving your children anything like as much as you got yourself? 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. And of course, a lot of them will be on the bus because the bus is free. Well, I say it's free. I don't know how many times you've had to replace your children's Oyster card after that. It's not free when you're moving into replacement territory. Hey, remind me next time the mayor comes in. Because I told him he should have allowed the free children's bus pass, the Oyster card the children get. He should have introduced technology to let them load it up on their phones, and then they'd never be able to lose it unless they lost their phone, which happens much less often than losing the card. And nothing happened. I forgot to follow that up. I'll get the hang of this one day.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
18 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to, well, you know you are. Children don't walk to school, which is a simple, relatively low-level question. Why not? It's going down in the last 6 years. But why do we generally afford less freedom to our own children than we received ourselves, despite the fact that in our bones we know that it's a good thing? Owen is in Ladbroke Grove. Owen, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. How you doing?
Very well.
My child is 18 this year, never taken a bus to school in his life.
How does he get there?
I drop him, or his mum drops him. His mum took basically the first 12 years out of her life to drop him to school and look after him and stuff like that. She was still doing part-time work. But it's too dangerous, James. Too dangerous. I've got three younger boys. They're all at 18 to 21. And the older two have all been, well, one has been robbed twice for his phone. The other one he just keeps his phone in his pocket, but he's been accosted like, give me your phone. But one of my sons, they took his phones twice.
I'm such a doofus, Owen, because it depends largely on where you live, doesn't it? So
100%.
I know Ladbroke Grove well. I used to live there myself, and
I'm actually Holston, northwest.
So you're up the Harrow Road, up the other end of the Harrow Road.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So there's a lot of trouble around there. And the question of whether you let your boys walk to school together is going to be informed by the trouble, not informed by slightly more vague or abstract fears of unspecified threat. It's a specified threat. How does he feel about it? Does he bridle at all? Does he feel? Because most of his mates are not going to be getting that chauffeur service.
No, he in the beginning it wasn't a challenge because obviously to make him aware of the safety reasons behind it. But after a while, he just loved it. He just didn't have to walk to school.
That's my boy. What's not to like? What's not to like? Change the music, Mum.
We're still his cabbie. He told me now to come and pick him up. Do you know what I mean?
But but then he's going to have a bit. I mean, once the strings are cut, then he's going to have a bit of a culture shock.
Don't get me wrong. All right, I'll tell you how it went.
Go on.
Going to school, right? Back when he was going to school and all of that.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of elements, because you've got people meeting up that don't see each other every day like that. They only see at school. So you've got the boys that want to show off, the guys that just hang around, and then those that just want to fit in. So you've got all those elements going to school. Then you're going to see one person walking to school by himself, and then, that happens.
Yes, of course.
So out of school, when school's finished, half of those elements do not mix, so they don't behave like that. Okay. So when he's out of school and he's with his people and his friends, it's totally safe.
Comfort zone.
100%. But it's for more peace of mind for myself.
Well, I was about to say you're quite hands-on about this, and you're heavily engaged, partly because of the experiences of your older boys, and you've been keen not to see them replicated with your
and I know the area, and obviously I've been there and seen it all.
Yes. And so he has got independence, but only in the circumstances when these sort of
many years ago I spoke to Nick one time. I think it was over 20 odd years ago.
Yeah.
When one of the first stabbings was in Harlesden. It actually happened at my front door.
Oh wow!
Literally outside my front door step.
Focuses.
And my son questioned the boys. Like he asked me, "What are those boys up to?" And I said, "Nah, don't worry about them. They're just local kids."
Just messy.
By the time we got in the front door, the kid was stabbed right in front of my front door.
Yeah.
Literally.
You're not going to get over that in a hurry, are you?
No, not at all.
About that.
So I think it's little things like that, and it's peace of mind. Just drop them to school, pick them up. I don't know. So I think it's just the way it is.
Well, yeah, it is. And final question. Presumably, it puts them in quite a small minority. Most of the other people going to and from school would have been making their own way, for good or for ill.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky then, in a way, and you and your wife, you and his mum are lucky that the option was there, albeit that you clearly made sacrifices in order to create that option. Sometimes thank you, Owen. Sometimes I'm just as daft as a brush. I'm reading about a lovely message comparing rural Derbyshire to Cheshire on what it's like for walking to school. But of course, if you're in an area where gangs are active, then you've got a completely different set of questions in front of you than you have than if you're in an area where they're not. Emily's in Tottenham. Emily, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Well, Tottenham, lots of gangs, lots of people undesirables walking around. I'm a mum of 8-year-old boys. As
God, I thought
we
you
know,
said I thought a mum of 8 then. Go on.
No, but I'm a mum of 8-year-old twin boys, and
Yes.
I'm on my own with them. We've spoken about this before.
Yes.
I give them a little bit of freedom. So, for example, if something needs posting at the local shop, like the little Turkish shop where you download the labels if I've sold something on Vinted,
Yes.
I'll send them round the corner to post it, because I think things like that are really important.
Yes.
I would, their school is really close, and I would, if I was allowed, send them on their own, but you're not actually, they're 8, so they're not actually allowed to do that at the moment. I'm not a helicopter mum in any way.
No,
because I think
clearly.
it's really dangerous.
But you're not but you're not negligent either. That's the point, isn't it?
No, not negligent.
Yeah.
No, I'm really on top of it. I'm really, I teach them about the road and the street, and don't walk around with your phone out and your bag and all the rest of it. So if they go out, then they don't take a bag with them. If they've got a bag with them, there's nothing to steal. But they need to be aware. We live in North London. We live in Tottenham. They need to be aware of
But
what's going
do
on.
they need to be aware at 8? Why is it important to you? What's the thought process because presumably
Well,
most of your friends with children of the same age are not enjoying quite this level of freedom.
No. So we've got friends who. So the other day, my friend sent her daughter, who's 9. So she's only just 9. She sent her daughter to us to drop off some veg for us, because they were going away for the weekend and she didn't want the veg to go off. So she said, right, she's left the house, and I text her 2 minutes later. She's just turned up. She stayed and played with my boys for 5 minutes, and then I text her mum and said she's gone, and she texts me she's back. So they only have one road to cross, and there's a zebra crossing.
And they're learning skills that are actually important.
You can't just,
All right, here's the thing. So there'll be people listening to this who are nodding along and going, yeah, that's fine, that's great.
Yeah.
But, and then
when they're older, listen, I'm going to have a completely different approach, because right now they're not a target. When they're 12, 13.
I see. Oh, okay. Well, that's a whole...
skills that they're picking up now. Listen, my boys eat vegetables and fruit like it's coming out of their ears. When they're 13, they're going to want to live at the chicken shop. But they'll come back round to what I'm instilling in them now.
Wow.
I'm aware that, so I'm aware they're going to go off and do really naughty, dangerous things. But everything I'm doing now, they'll come back round to it. They'll do that loop when they're, I don't know when, maybe it's 20, 21, I don't know.
No, I love that.
It's just about instilling little things. So the other day, my friend was at the park at the top of the road. We'd been out all morning. They wanted to go. So I said, go on, she's at the top of the road. I could just see she was waving a Sainsbury's bag.
Yeah.
And I could just see. I said, off you go. And she texted me, they're here.
Right.
And so do you see what I mean? It's just about giving them a little bit of
I see
freedom.
exactly what you mean, and you're making a really perfect case for it. And of course, you've absolutely diffused any sort of question of negligence, because you've actually thought about it more than people who are keeping their children under lock and key. But hang on, I've got to get a word in edgeways, Emily, please. But some people will be thinking about the 1 in a million chance. They think, well, it's all very well this, but so how do you silence the voice that talks?
1 in a million.
Well, there it is.
It's 1 in a million. I mean, I could get knocked over myself, or I could get robbed myself. It's just, and we hear about stuff constantly all the time. We didn't hear about it so much when you and I were growing up.
No.
We have a 24-hour news cycle. So now I go on my phone, I'm looking on my WhatsApp.
Yeah.
I can see lots of missing children. People are putting this missing children, that missing children. There's no more or less missing children than there was when we were growing up. It's just that we're hearing about it more often, because everybody, and I mean everybody, has access to promoting or
constantly plugged into them. Well, there's definitely something in that, and I mean, you're obviously right in your attitude, but I also completely understand why people get their head turned by the proliferation of information. Emily, thank you. That's really helpful. So the reason why I mentioned why bus passes were free in London for school children is because a couple of texts were sort of not necessarily in a passive aggressive way, but were insisting that I say that as if I'd forgotten or didn't know. So I mentioned that passes, and now I've got a bunch of texts saying, well, it's only free in London. So public transport is only free. So just for the record, it's free in London for school children until they lose their card and you have to pay TfL to replace it. I don't know the situation in other big cities like Manchester and Birmingham, but for an awful lot of people, it's not free at all. So I'll use Emma in Swanley as my exemplar. For my son to get to school a 12-minute bus ride would cost over £450 a year. It's too dangerous to cycle because of the traffic and country lanes, and it's too far to walk, especially in winter when it's dark. So there's a lovely hat-trick of answers to the question of why Emma's boy is not part of the desired increase in children walking to school that the Department of Transport was trying to introduce. Valerie is in Islington. Valerie, what would you like to say?
First of all, a good afternoon, and I never knew you was a raver, James. It's amazing.
How could you not know? Right, absolutely on it. From 1988 onwards, actually. But anyway, on we go, Valerie. Thank you.
No, and thanks for taking my call. I just heard this expression of the helicopter, and I've never heard it before, but I've got a 20-year-old and an 8-year-old, and for me, I kind of raise them differently. So I think I'm less controlling in terms of her going to the corner shop and where I can see her obviously, but I'm not like before, hold her hand and wait for me and look across that way. I've got this thing, we call it the 360 approach. So we're always looking around us, getting on the bus, she'll sit the far side, I might be the other side. She's very aware of her surroundings, and I think often when you're raising daughters, it's different to raising sons. And I think you have to be really on it and savvy, because the last generation, obviously, they had a lot more security. I think now social media for me is one that I think you can't avoid. So if you're teaching your kids now to be more, streetwise and knowing what's around them, then they'll be able to challenge if anything comes their way. If that makes sense.
Yes, of course it does. Of course it does. Why social media? I mean, what?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it. Something kicks off, and then you've got a load of people recording.
That's what I thought. No, that's what I thought you meant. So yes, yeah, okay.
And then there's the thing of also, I just want to just add one point as well. Is I feel we don't talk about it enough, but with daughters or those that self-identify, the whole upskirting thing. I think so. It's just social media can be quite just.
You need to be on your guard at the very least, and of course, if you need to be on your guard, then being protected is the very easy next step, isn't it? Therefore, you don't let your children go off on their own and do stuff that you would have done, or even, someone 10 years older than your 20-year-old would have done. This
is it. And you have to normalise, living. I feel like the pandemic, we were all, locked up, and now things have changed. And criminal activity, they start, hoaxing kids from very young, and some kids also look a bit older.
So the threats are out
be mindful. Yeah, you've got and different, obviously.
Do you and Emily? I know you've got an 8-year-old girl and she's got 8-year-old boys, and that, as you acknowledged at the beginning, as you explained at the beginning, is a big part of the difference, not to be overlooked. But two completely different attitudes that I find equally compelling. It's so bizarre, isn't it? It's almost as if there's no right and no wrong. But the more thought you give it, the more comfortable you will be with your own.
It is.
Choices.
And just one more ad, James, is I feel like, back in the day you could play out and you could look over your balcony and be like, oh, my kid's fine. And you even the neighbours, you'd see, we all knew each other. I feel that needs to come back. I think now kids are not even allowed to walk down, and put rubbish in the chute. It's bizarre. And I think we need to go back to that, and then our kids won't be so even frightened or fearful that they'll own. I mean, the streets are our streets. This is always my expression.
Yes.
And I think you should know your neighbour, know Ali in the sweet shop down the road, know where the post box is. This is all about those kind of skills that we need going forward. When you get older, you're more savvy on it as well.
Well, very nicely put. And I think a lot of that, certainly back in the day, was cars, because you'd know people, because you'd be coming in and out, particularly with children and school runs and pushchairs, you'd be coming in and out of the house and you'd meet your neighbours a lot more. And now you only walk from the house to the car quite often, and not everywhere, but in some places, and there'll be other reasons in different areas. 12:32 is the time. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 12:36. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The decline in children walking to school, and much broader issues, as the callers have done a much better job than me of drawing them out this hour, of why the amount of freedom parents afford to their children changes with the generation. Zach's in Thurrock. Zach, what would you like to say?
I think times have changed, James, since the 90s and the 2000s.
Why? Why though?
Well, I think out there it's a lot more. It's not as safe as it used to be.
If you've got a boy and there is any sort of gang activity or knife crime in that neck of the woods, then you're going to have a different attitude from what our parents had.
Yes, 100%. It's not that as well. I think the kids now, they're not as tough as they used to be. I think we could leave them outside for a couple. Like, I used to go out all the time, play football in the park for 6-7 hours. Mum and Dad, they'd know where I was, but they weren't there all the time, and they'd have to come get us sometimes because it was raining really, really bad. But I think kids now, they're not as strong, and also the culture out there. A lot of knife crime out there, a lot of robberies going on. I've got an 18-year-old, and even to this day, when he goes out on a night out with his university lot, I get worried quite a bit, and I'm still awake when he gets home, wondering if he's going to be okay. I used to live in inner London where I was brought up, and in the 90s and the 2000s, and if incidents did occur, it wouldn't jump up to knife crime, and knife wouldn't be involved. You'd have maybe a little bit of a tear up or whatnot, and you go your separate ways. But now you've got knife crime, you've got robberies, especially in inner London.
It's funny because I thought
go on for a reason.
Yes,
I moved back to Essex for a reason. For safety, actually, for safety for my son, just to move out that way.
And has it worked?
Yeah, it has worked. Because ironically, I've got a really good relationship with my son. I was speaking to him, and I said to him, I'm surprised that he's not been approached in his, let's say, from 12 years on to now, and someone asking for his phone. He's never had that where we are. And
he almost guaranteed that he would have done if you'd stayed in central.
100%, 100% in East London, South East London. It's just a change. It's a change, and it got to the stage where I think I am over controlling to a certain extent. When he was 17 years old, I got him a car and I said, "Look, you need to pass the test so you can drive to university."
God, jackpot! That's over controlling or over generous? I don't know.
However, he failed his driving test. So he finishes uni.
So you got him a car before he sat his driving test?
Yes.
Fantastic dadding that, Zach.
Right, so he finishes uni, he then goes to gym. He's at the gym till 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, and it's dark now. And I've got his mum saying, "Oh, you need to go get him. It's too dark to walk home now."
So you've made a rod for your own back.
Yeah, exactly. But look, I totally understand why people are doing it now. Especially if I've got one child, and if anything was to happen, I would just absolutely heartbroken.
Well, that's true. That's true of all of us, and that is the large subconscious drive for a lot of these decisions, a lot of these thoughts. But as Emily said, it's 1 in a million. I mean, some of the stuff we've talked about isn't 1 in a million, but there's a message here from. I can't see who it's from. Just bear with me, and it talks about Madeleine McCann, the Moors murders, Soham. Those are all, for want of a slightly less glib phrase, that's from Helen, they are all 1 in a million things. It's odd to let them influence your decisions, but of course knife crime and street crime are not 1 in a million things, far from it. This is a helpful text, although I don't think it will cut the mustard with Helen. Reports state that taking a population increase into account, missing persons reports have dropped by about 40% since 1997. Because of internet and social media, people are more alert, people are more easily found. So it might sound like loads are missing because you see so much about people missing, but it's the messages that have increased, not the actual disappearances. You wouldn't have known about it previously, and then the figures have dropped massively since the 60s and 70s. So statistically, it was worse when we were kids. And in a sense, we were blissfully unaware. But 96% of children are runaways, 0.1% due to strangers. So, 0.1%, but there it is. You still worry about it, I think. 12:40 is the time. A little departure now. As you've probably noticed, I've been busy promoting my book for the last couple of weeks, been on tour. Thank you, Southampton. We had an absolute ball last night in Southampton. It was a wonderful, wonderful event. I'm in Birmingham tomorrow and Northampton on Sunday, but it means I haven't been able to record a full disclosure this week. I'm doing Chris McCausland on Monday, which I'm really looking forward to for next week's full disclosure. So we return to the archives this week for 2 reasons. Number one, the podcast is getting more popular all the time, so new arrivals might have missed some juicy examples from the recent past. And number two, it's on the YouTube channel now. We're trying to get the full disclosure up as a visual. Well, YouTube are trying to get full disclosure up as a visual thing. So we've gone back to some of the ones that we did when we were deploying the full film crew. And the Prue Leith one I just thought was fascinating because you'll know her from Bake Off. But if you're not familiar with full disclosure, It's a long-form interview series where I try and find out about people up to the point where we found out about them because they were famous. It doesn't stop with the minute they got their first record deal or their first TV show or their first trip into space. Actually, it kind of did stop with Tim Peake when he got his first trip into space, to be honest with you. But I'm just interested in the stuff that we don't know about them. It's not record-breaking or earth-shattering or new. Lots of other interviewers but it's just what interests me most. And it's hard to think of anyone from the Full Disclosure archive who had a more surprisingly interesting backstory than Prue Leith.
I went to the Cordon Bleu, did an advanced course there, and then I just started to cook people's dinners. I sort of running around London with a basket of ingredients in one and knives and
word of mouth, relying on word of mouth,
yeah,
and a few
yes, women mostly posh women in Belgravia and Holland Park and places who would hire me to do their dinner parties.
Right.
And then
they pretend they'd done it themselves, or
occasionally.
Okay, yes. And were other people doing that, or had you found a
No, there were other people doing that, and I've got my first job because somebody rang up the Cordon Bleu when I was there.
Okay.
And asked, because the teachers used to often cook for people's dinners in the evening. Quite a lot of the teachers made extra money by chefing at night, and so they didn't have a chef. So they sent a couple of us, two students who they thought were quite good students. So we went up to Highgate somewhere and cooked somebody's dinner, and I'll never forget it because I was so nervous. And we had 2 days. We had a day to prepare, and then or an evening to prepare, and then the next evening to cook it. And when I forget what we were paid, I think £2 each or something. And we spent it all on a taxi home because we were so exhausted. And,
it's not a great business model, is it?
No.
We'll get on to business in a moment because I think it's a key part of your story, isn't it? The way the two went hand in hand, the entrepreneurial flair as much as the culinary flair. But how did you, or when did you realise that you had a proper talent, a gift indeed for cookery and for food? And I don't want any modesty.
No, I won't. I'm not. I'm modest. I'm not. I think simply because every time I cooked somebody's dinner, almost every time, somebody who was at the dinner would contact the hostess and say, "Who cooked the dinner?" And then I'd get another job and so forth. And I also realised I'm quite good at marketing.
Yes.
Because my husband always says this is the proof of my marketing. But when I was in Holland Park cooking a dinner, there was a hatch between the kitchen and the dining room, and I could hear the hostess talking. And somebody said, "This is delicious," and she said, "Yes, isn't it?" And then she said, "Can I have the telephone number of the girl in the kitchen?" And she said, "Oh, no, she's just there for the washing up." She said, I always do my own cooking.
Oh, fantastic.
And I wanted to fling the doors out, open the hatch and say, hey, it was me. But I didn't. But what I did do is I put my little business card into every pocket of all the guests in the hall.
Oh, really?
In the coats hanging up, you see. And I wrote on the top of them, "Your dinner was cooked by." And one of those diners rang me up the next day, and he turned out to be a very posh guy called Lord Ryder, and he was the head of Reed Publishing. And he said, would I come and cook his, do some work for their company? And he became a good customer.
Lovely stuff. And the background and the childhood in South Africa is even more interesting, actually. I think I'm allowed to say that. So you can download Full Disclosure wherever you get your... Well, Global Player is probably the best place to get it, where you can also, of course, download this programme or listen to this programme with a full rewind function where you are in control.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:48 is the time. I don't have guests by popular demand very often. Although, to be fair, among the people asking me to get John Ashton back on the show was John Ashton. So, there's popular demand and then there's really popular demand. You may remember him from appearances on this programme and many others in the early days of the COVID pandemic. If you don't, here's a little reminder.
Should Boris Johnson have gone further yesterday?
Yes, he should. I mean, what we've seen is a Prime Minister who was absent on his watch. I mean, he should have convened COBRA early on. He should have got a grip on it with the Chief Medical Officer and public health advisors, and he didn't do that. And we've lost 5-6 weeks now. I think it's interesting that the amount of testing that's been carried out is very, very little, and they're reducing that. They haven't built up the capacity for testing.
They said they're doing 2,000 a day. They can't test everyone. They need to be for critical situations. Well, this is what Patrick Vallon's saying. It's neither sensible nor necessary to test everyone.
No, well, what's come out from places that have begun to get on top of this is doing a lot of testing, a lot of proactive segregation and quarantining.
That's just one example of John saying things that are now, in the context of the COVID-19 inquiry, becoming, pretty close to irrefutable. He was, of course, a director of public health for the Northwest and has subsequently written a book called Blinded by Corona, which contains some telling examples of the sort of reception that he received at that time from many people in positions of authority. On Question Time, Fiona Bruce said, John, you are a reasonably lone voice on the panel. I'm not passing judgment. I'm glad John is not leading our response, said Dr. Claire Gerarda, who was head of the College of GPs and has subsequently been put in the House of Lords. Stephen Barclay said he, as in John, is at odds with the leading scientists of the UK. And a director of public health in Sheffield said he isn't part of and doesn't speak for nor represent the view of the public health community. And yet, really, as we've discovered in the last few days, John, you were right and they were wrong.
And it gives me no pleasure.
I'm sure it doesn't.
It was obvious from very early on to myself, and it was to other public health colleagues who had an understanding of the history of pandemics, that we were facing into the abyss and that we really needed to take concerted action. But there was failure on so many fronts. I mean, as we've seen in the last few weeks, it centres around the incompetence of the Prime Minister and other ministers. But there was, as so often happens with disasters, there was a convergence of factors. You know, the public health system had been allowed to run down. There'd been big cuts in the staff in public health and the money, and the local public health was neglected. They'd centralised public health under Duncan Selby at Public Health England. And then you had people like the chief scientist, Patrick Vallance, calling for herd immunity, letting the virus run, and ministers saying, let it run hot. Old people don't matter, all that stuff. I was trying to point it out. And there were concerted efforts made to get me shut up. I mean, the Conservative Friends of Israel dug up a comment I'd made in 2014 when the Israel Defense Force had bombed a school in Gaza and accused me of anti-Semitism and demanded that the BBC should stop me from being on the media, which is very strange.
And quite, I imagine, for someone who hadn't really put their head above the parapet in some ways before, just through opportunity. I'm not suggesting for a moment that you're shy of putting your head above the parapet, but I suspect you were quite bruised by it all, were you?
I was very bruised, and I was reported to the GMC at one point. I was accused of behaving unprofessionally, not least by Claire Gerarda, who accused me of being basically incompetent, and others who had the same attitude. We had, things came out like Dame Sally Davis had been chief medical officer during the Cygnus test run in 2016, and had said at the time, there were so many dead bodies we'd run out of body bags, but she didn't do anything about it, even though she was chief medical officer.
Presumably it all felt a little bit surreal at the time, because in your own mind all you're doing is pushing an alarm bell. All you're doing really is shouting from the rooftops, we must do more, and pointing out what's not being done. And the forces that, not forever, because fairly quickly the scale of the catastrophe became clear and the conversation moved on inevitably. But the forces that were pushing back against you must have been quite hard to understand.
It was very hard, and particularly because I had the comparison of what was happening in Bahrain, where they'd taken me out after those first people were brought back from Wuhan to be quarantined at Arrow Park. And I did an interview for Sky on the 2nd of February 2020. And Bahrain asked me to come out and criticise what they were going to do. And they were amazing. They did everything I said, and they performed really well. I came back and I had this contrast.
Yes.
And I came back from Bahrain the second time into this mess where Cheltenham was about to be run.
Of course.
Atletico Madrid were about to play at Anfield, and Madrid had been closed down. This famous question time where Fiona Bruce kept shutting me up, and Stephen Barclay had the lion's share of the programme. I felt so frustrated, and the frustration came across. I had one colleague phoned up and said she thought I was drunk. What on earth was that about?
Because you were...
I was so passionate about it.
Yes, of course. I think it's in Mark, isn't it? A prophet is not without honour except in his own country. This is the fate you suffered. So I'm glad you stressed at the outset that there's no pleasure whatsoever in vindication. I presume you'd rather have been proved wrong in a way, and that things turned out not to be anywhere near as bad as you said they were going to be.
I would love to have been proved wrong. But the issue was those critical few weeks from the beginning of March right up to when the emergency was declared in the last week in March, when action should have been taken 3 or 4 weeks earlier, and that would have saved tens of thousands of lives. And all the other stuff that followed since, the criticism about the lockdown, but the lockdown had become essential by then.
Yes, of course.
If they'd been more effective earlier on, we wouldn't have needed to lock down in the same way. And that's not really being said at the moment, but hopefully it'll be picked up in the inquiry.
Yes, indeed. They're not calling you, as it stands.
No, I have not been called to the inquiry, which I find bizarre as well.
Yes. Well, I'm glad you're here. How closely have you been watching it all?
I'm reading it on a daily basis in the newspaper.
And can I ask what your emotional reaction is to it, even before your intellectual one?
Emotionally, I feel this profound regret at the fact that our public health system, which was for over 100 years the pride of internationally for public health, it was the gold standard, was not up to it on the day, and that the Prime Minister, who was incompetent, wasn't challenged by those who should have challenged him. There was a lot of talk about speaking truth to power, but the people who should have spoken truth to power, senior public health figures, senior people in government, didn't speak truth to power. And so this crazy, anarchistic, narcissistic Johnson was able to trample over people's lives and to lead to this attitude that old people don't matter.
Yeah. Has there been a sense of... Because obviously it's bleak and you'd be desolated by the failure to heed your warnings. But there must have been some confusion in your mind about how it was happening. Has the inquiry almost put the jigsaw together for you? Have you had moments of going, that's why it was all so awful?
Well, I think I got it.
You would already work that out.
And it's in the book, actually. But I think that I thought coming up to the inquiry, the danger was it would be a whitewash. I don't think it's going to be a whitewash now. But the real danger is that although the Prime Minister was fundamentally at the heart of the responsibility, the fact that there was all these other issues that were wrong as well, like allowing public health to be run down, and it's been run down since the pandemic. Sure. We've had budget cuts in public health since the pandemic, and that the local level continues to be under pressure because of it's now being in local government, and they've been hammered financially, and there isn't the money in local government for public health. And the regional level of public health, which was strong until 2013, until Mr. Lansley did his hatchet job on public health. So there's lots of other aspects which need to be addressed, apart from the fact that the Prime Minister wasn't up to the job.
John Ashton, whose book Blinded by Corona is, I'll tell you what the President of the Royal Society of Medicine, Roger Kirby, said about it simply. Everyone should read this book, How the Pandemic Ruined Britain's Health and Wealth, and crucially, what to do about it. Thank you, John. It's good to see you.
Thanks, James. Thank you very much.
That's it from me for another week. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back to the whole show podcast on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. You'll find all of LBC shows to catch up on, as well as the best video clips from LBC and all our global stations. Pause and rewind live radio on Global Player, where you're always in control. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's Sheila Fogarty.
Hello, you know I'm a terrible interrupter and passing comment all the time.
No.
I am. John and I go back a long way, do we not, to Hillsborough days. Gosh. John was described within a year of Hillsborough, when the lies and the denial was going on and on and on and on and on, as an inconvenient witness.
Gosh.
And you have proved to be so again, to the powers that be. Yeah.
Oh, I got a little shiver then.
I like to give you a shiver every now and again, James. See it as my role in life.
No, she is a traitor to Liverpool.
She left.
James O'Brien on LBC.